Right, hello everyone. Welcome to this delightful interview, which I'm very happy to be part of today. I'd like to introduce Craig Wright, aka Satoshi Nakamoto, creator of Bitcoin and the Metanet, and inventor of many things which in his paintings, which everyone's going to be seeing over the next few years. Brilliant genius all way round. And also Michael Wehrman, who will be hosting today, asking most of the questions, with a little bit of assistance from myself occasionally. Otherwise, the floor shall be Michael's and Craig's. And also myself, Joel Dalle, founder and director of the Metanet ICU membership club. So over to you, Michael.
Yeah, thank you, Joel, and thank you, Craig, for taking the time today to discuss some Bitcoin-related topics.
You're welcome.
And the first topic would be Bitcoin as a unilateral contract, because I read an article by you, Craig, that you published some months ago on your website called Forking and Passing Off.
Yes.
In it, you basically describe Bitcoin as a unilateral contract, and you go into database rights breaches and many other things. And that was quite interesting, to say the least, to read that. And I think it's not being discussed enough yet. So I would like to talk about.
I was just going to say, I think it's an area that very few people understand. Very few people who even promote things like sort of software licenses of different types for open source and whatever else comprehend there are differences between the data and the software. So when you have something such as MySQL, I keep pointing out, you can actually have an MIT or even any of the licenses, yet that does not cover any of the works created. So this is a distinction that people fail to understand. So you can actually say, look, I'm putting this out there. If someone can copy the software, but they can't necessarily just do what they want with the rest of everything else.
Exactly. And in your article, and I'm going to screen share that quote I'm going to read out here. Let me try to screen share that. Can you see the quote here somewhere?
Yes,
I can. Said Bitcoin has an issuer. In January 2009, I issued 21 million Bitcoin. To distribute the tokens, I set up a contractual arrangement where nodes act within a set of common rules that are defined.
Correct.
So that's what you wrote, Craig. And
yes.
You kind of gave an introduction already to this idea. But first of all, what is the actual basis or content of that contract? Is it the Bitcoin white paper or the website or the software as in the end user license agreement? What is the actual basis?
Combination of all of the above. So it would include the definitions on the original website, not what it is now. That's still actually available. Wayback Machine still holds copies. So you can actually go back to January 2009 and see what Bitcoin was before people decided to start changing it. And the terms in the code, the definition there, all of that creates what you have. It creates the definition of how it will act. And then it would be refined from my comments that are now posted, mostly unaltered, but some have been a bit tweaked on Bitcoin Talk.
So it's safe to say the Bitcoin contract consists of all of which was published back then, the white paper, the website, and the end user license agreement. Okay, great. So
can I just want to ask Craig a question to clarify the point on Bitcoin Talk?
Sure.
Is that if Craig could clarify for our viewers how the newer postings of Satoshi, how they are not him in such, and how that's been kind of
well, it's not so much the newer, it's the copied. Most people don't realize that Bitcoin Talk didn't actually exist until after I had stopped interacting, and some of the things people didn't have access to, so they created a new site, and basically they copied most of what was there onto a new system with a few edits, and said that that's the traditional system. And it's funny, even people who've been around for a long time didn't even realize, because they don't think about the domain they're clicking on. Because on the main website, you'd click on a link to the forums, And the fact that you got redirected to a different link later on, people didn't notice. So even Mr. Shadders, when I discussed this with him, he went, "No,
because I think I've lost you."
I can still. You're not moving, but I can see you.
We're both still here.
Oh, there you're moving again.
I lost you for a second. Okay.
Back to Craig.
But I was going to say, I had this debate with Mr. Shadders who told me, no, you're wrong. You're remembering this wrong. I remember I went to the Bitcoin forum site and it said, and I went, have a look. And eventually he did. And he went, so Bitcoin Talk wasn't there. And I went, no, it wasn't. So where did I go? And I went, it was actually a sub-forum site. It was bitcoin.org/forums. People didn't realize that at first. But what can we say? Years later, people forget these things.
Anyone looking into the history and the origins? There you go.
Well, I mean, no one seems to realize that the PGP key that is listed on the website now isn't, it only got put up there in February 2011 after I left. It's not the original one.
Okay, correct.
And if you have a look at the Wayback Machine, you'll see that too. But please ask.
Okay. So just to make this very clear for the viewers, all Bitcoins, the tokens are issued already, but the tokens are not yet all distributed. Is that correct?
That's correct. That is correct, yes.
And then my question would be, are you the issuer and the distributor of all Bitcoin tokens? Or are the nodes the distributor?
Well, no, the nodes are receivers. They're recipients. So I'm the issuer. They were all issued in the beginning of January 2009. Now, the sort of value at that time was zero. It was less than zero, to tell you the truth. When you consider investment money and everything like that, it was way less than zero. So distribution, though, is predefined. So you can argue that they're not distributed yet, but the beauty of having a unilateral contract that is a rolling contract is that effectively I've gone out there and created a condition where everything is locked in. And for the first few years, that was a problem. Under a number of provisions with like clawback and whatever else, if there was any value, people could grab that from me until it passes a certain statutory limit, which is way past now. After I had actually created Bitcoin, I was in a stoush with the Australian Tax Office because I was suing them. I ended up winning, by the way. People don't realize that. The tax office ended up losing the case and having to even apologize to me, which I'm sure they hate. But I have a formal written apology for one of those early things. But effectively what they were trying to do, which is really nasty and underhanded, was they tried to bankrupt me based on money that they said I was that was owed. And they said, well, it's fair because the administrator will find it out. But what the purpose was is if they put me into bankruptcy, the administrator, who was paid by the tax office, could close down the court case I had before I won it. In which case they would then say, well, obviously you're not fighting the amount that you owe, so you owe it, therefore you're bankrupt. So in order to make sure that I couldn't fight them, they tried to bankrupt me first.
If you would have gone bankrupt, if you would have gone bankrupt, by the way, if you would have gone bankrupt, what would have happened to the contractual offer that was still ongoing?
It was still within the statute of limitations back in 2011 and 2012. So the amount of Bitcoin that I had wasn't worth as much as it is now. We're only talking millions, which to everyone sounds a lot of money, but comparatively it's different. It's just insane now. but the administrator would have been able to claw back rights, and it just would have totally collapsed the system. I mean, you imagine at that stage, the majority of Bitcoin's not mined, but a government official walks in and says, we now own it all, and we're taking it and we're changing how it works. It would have been a nightmare.
Well, that's funny, because I was going to ask about the ownership of the tokens, distributed or not distributed. So the transfer of ownership of the Bitcoin tokens, the issuance initially, that wasn't the transfer of ownership, right? Because there was no counterparty in the issuance. You didn't issue to someone, you issued. But the distribution of the tokens, there's where ownership can be like changed, right?
Well,
from one hand to another.
I issued, and then I transferred to a trust structure that I created. And I set up a company overseas called Wright International Investments. So the trust structure and other things were done then so that I could actually hand that away from me. But when you do an allocation, there's a period of time for a few years where someone actually can do a clawback if they say that it's undervalued or something like that. And of course, when I did the allocation compared to what the value was worth later, you could argue, well, I must have known that Bitcoin's going to be worth so much, which is really stupid because it was worth nothing at first. But 2020 in hindsight, people could sit there going now, well, obvious, everyone should have invested in Bitcoin because look at what it's worth, which is a terrible argument when you think about it. I mean, after the fact, it's easy to say, well, if I'd invested now.
Yeah, and how do you even measure the worth of all the value of all the Bitcoins? Because there is not enough liquidity in the market anyways. So.
Oh, I know. I mean, I've got
how can you
handwritten, I've got some really embarrassing handwritten diaries and notes that are going to come out in some of these court cases where I didn't even expect it to fully pay my costs, but I thought that the creation of Bitcoin would get me two things. I thought it would get me an offer of partnership in one of the, like either BDO or like one of the big four for a great new accounting thing and whatever else. I'd become a partner and I'd get tenure at a university. They were the two things I thought I'd get. That was my ambitions.
Wait, one university?
Okay, you
Sorry?
Only at one university you were after?
Yeah, I thought I'd get a full professorship and a partnership in an accounting firm, and that was my entire way. I mean, rather embarrassing when I look back at that one.
Yeah, you got way more, I guess, than what you expected. Okay, so
and then some.
Who is the rightful owner of the not yet distributed tokens?
Well, you would say that it's under a constructive trust. So the trust owns a company, but a constructive trust isn't like some people get confused. They think there has to be a formal trust, but there's something in law called a constructive trust. And because there's a promise to allocate every single Satoshi that will ever be paid in mining, then effectively the requirement is that they're held there for that.
Okay.
So
what
nominally versus actually.
And what happens to the contractual offer when the last tokens are distributed? Is it like
free.
Gone or
free?
Free. You're free finally. Okay.
Wait, I want to clarify that point because we were discussing it the other day. Michael means more along the lines of when all the subsidies run out, does the contract end? So you are not obligated to uphold the white paper, uphold the specifications and such once the subsidy ends. My point, which I wasn't 100% sure on, was that the contract stays, it just kind of moves over. The contract kind of involves that the subsidy will end.
Well, if
my
you look at it technically,
thoughts,
right now it would actually end. But this is part of what we're trying to do with the Bitcoin Association, where we want to try and lock these things in. Part of why people like Jimmy and everything like that are running that and trying to do this is we want to get a legal structure that won't disappear even after 2140. So, I mean, I thought it was good enough that 2140, but I mean, I'm a normal person. Not many people plan 100 years in advance anyway. So you're asking me what will happen in 150 years. Well, I'm trying to work on that now, but I hadn't at the time.
Okay, understandable. Craig, what's the users of Bitcoin? What's their part in the contractual agreement? Is there any part? And I guess it's not that they don't play any part, but they think they do.
Well, they can monitor and audit. So they have the rights to be able to view the headers and the transactions and see what happens. So effectively, as part of the contractual agreement to the world, by owning and taking and using Bitcoin, you're part of that agreement as well. And that as a whole binds me. So if someone goes out there and changes Bitcoin after saying you can't change it, then any person can effectively grab sort of a lawyer and start going to town on this. Bitcoin Core hasn't seemed to have realized that one yet. They will in time.
Okay, that's quite interesting.
Yeah, I mean, this is the thing people don't understand. Distributed groups of people are just known as a common law partnership. Now, that's not a limited partnership or anything like that, or association. A limited partnership have limited sort of liability, like a company. So this is a big concern. I keep pointing out that back in the 1990s, we went through this whole web IPO thing, and decentralized finance and all this stuff came up. Again, the anarchist idiots were running around until the SEC said, you guys are just a partnership. I went, no, we're not. We don't have a structure. And they went, that's called a common law partnership in law. Well, what's that mean? Well, it means that every person who wrote a line of code is now responsible for every dollar lost by any person anywhere. Yay.
Even if they already dropped out.
You could argue after a statutory limitation time period that I haven't engaged in this for 5 years, therefore I should not be liable anymore. Or I've sent in formal notice saying that I'm not taking any more liability, so after a few years from that, but yeah, you're liable for years.
I'd like to just bring up something that was mentioned in Slack at this point then. The importance of businesses.
I wouldn't say businesses. Business incorporates individuals owning things with unlimited liability. People get confused with the difference between a business and a company. The importance of a company or corporation. So what is the importance of a corporation? Limited liability. I keep pointing this out. It was one of the greatest freedoms that humankind ever managed to wrest away from the sovereign or the government ever, which is we can deal and form a way of raising money that doesn't mean our grandchildren will be paying for debts that had nothing to do with what some other guy in the company did.
Very, very important point, that one.
So, I mean, basically, if you look at this, if there's a director who breaks the law, unless you know about it, it can be isolated. And although the company might even go bankrupt, it doesn't mean that they can chase you for your assets. Whereas in a partnership, they can.
Okay, Craig, let us talk about BSV and BTC in comparison concerning the contractual agreement. Because in BSV, as far as I understand it, the BSV miners or nodes, they actually act according to the contractual offer, correct? But the BTC miners, since SegWit, they don't.
Well, see, it's not, I mean, since they were formed, because it's not the same system. Bitcoin doesn't branch. Bitcoin is purely a single tape. And tapes don't have versions of tape. So you can copy that tape like any digital asset. And there's a completely separate copy up to a point, and then it goes off its own way. And that's the distinction. There's no fork. There's a completely copied digital tape.
So what are the BTC miners doing from a contractual perspective then? Because with whom are they in contract now? With Blockstream or with other miners?
Bitcoin Core. So Bitcoin Core, that small group of individuals funded by Blockstream, etc., went out there and they created a copy of Bitcoin that they're passing off as Bitcoin. And by doing that, well, they're basically misleading investors. That in itself is a naughty, bad thing. So I keep pointing these things out, and people aren't as patient as me. Like I said about, I'll say 18 months. It was a little bit less than that, but 18 months sounds a good time because that's what everyone likes to say about Lightning. But a while back, I said Mr. Conman John's going to end up in prison. And everyone went, oh, it's been a couple of weeks and nothing's happened. Like I said, some of the other guys like Arthur and things would end up, and they have been. And I've said CZ is, and expect him to be going down big time. He can change hotel rooms all he wants, but he's going to be spending time in, well, with someone called Bubba, who might be his new husband.
Okay. Craig, but the BTC miners, before SegWit, they were in a contractual agreement with you, because before SegWit, they did enforce the rules that were set by you. Is that correct? But
That's
after SegWit,
yes.
They didn't. Yeah, but after SegWit, they didn't anymore. So they were in contract with you.
It's more complex than that because the BTC miners are companies. The people out there as pool members are contracting with the pool. So they're not miners, they're pool members. The miners are the nodes. So the pool company or the group that acts as a mining company, they're the ones that are contracting. And what happened after the copy into BTC is that they started effectively, some only mined on one, some mine on two. Nowadays they sort of mine across both tapes, both chains. And generally what you have is they take some mining and have some BSV and mine that under one contract, and have a different contract with the Bitcoin Core guys who try and pass off the fact that we're a decentralized group partnership. We don't have any support website, et cetera, neglecting the fact that there's only a very small number of them. Only a few people have GitHub keys. So
yeah, so that's interesting. You just said they do both. They mine both BTC and BSV now. But
yes.
if they mined BTC before SegWit and now they're mining SegWit coins, and they are also mining BSV, is there anything like non-contractual or secondary contractual duties or obligations from them that BTC miners may have violated now concerning your initially contract, like bad faith, deceptive practices, non-proper care, something like that?
Potentially, but any action like that would be against core. And you see, the miners wouldn't be the ones that you'd go after. The miners basically are acting in good faith by what they're being told. They're being fed information from a different group. So when you're sitting there going, the creator doesn't matter. What the creator of a system doesn't matter. We've copied it and made a new version. That one matters. That's an attestation on a financial services product. So, yeah, Cora. Everyone seems to think that everything in law happens quickly. I mean, I had a court case that went before I finalized it, and one that took 11 years.
Not bad.
And I don't have the record or anything either.
We are still talking about BTC for a second. Who's the rightful owner of the not yet distributed BTC or the SegWit coins? Who's the owner of that? Because I guess you're not anymore, or your trust isn't anymore, because in SegWit you.
Well, I never was. I mean,
yeah.
The unallocated is going to be effectively from the Bitcoin core group. They created it. They made the copy. And when you copy a chain and change the protocol, that creates a new issue. The big distinction they're going to find is when you do that, then when I created it, it had practically zero value. I mean, you could have put a $1 value on the entire 21 million and still been overvaluing it. Bitcoin Core, well, I can't remember what there was outstanding back then. I could do the math, but I couldn't be bothered. 8 million or something outstanding. Well, in 2017, let's see, that's a lot of money.
Exactly.
So they issued, and I mean, it's a big difference when you issue a valuable asset to one that, well, if you put it for $1 and you start any sort of issue at $1, there's not much tax liability. When you issue it at billions and billions of dollars out of nowhere.
So is Core actually issuing the SegWit coins and distributing them, and they are the owners?
Yes,
fairly high valuation. Okay.
At very high valuation, yeah.
Exactly. And are they aware of that, or?
When you're an anarchist who believes that government should not exist and you don't need to pay tax, that becomes a problem in itself.
I've just got to throw in that up until now, I hadn't realised what a deep hole Blockstream has actually dug for itself. That is a rather deep hole.
Yeah. And we're still in a period where people, including government, could actually grab some of those coins. Because if you create that value, I mean, they can argue that they're giving them away at cost. But that's going forward. So they have a capitalized value in that they need to account for right now. So as long as they keep giving them away as part of the contractual process, they can argue that that's depreciating and down valuing and all the rest. But that's completely different when you consider something like Bitcoin Cash, with their whole now move to regain some of that as a minor fee or a tax, or their tax on the economy. That's going to involve not donation money like they think. They're not a registered charity. That involves having to pay capital gains, involves having to pay all of the value. And once you do that, I mean, you're potentially talking about maybe a $20 billion tax bill for them. So, but they're sitting there going, we're decentralized, we don't need to pay. And trust me, once the government really figures out, which they will, making sure that they do, that they can actually intercept and regain access of Bitcoin, $20 billion is not something that after coronavirus, any government's going to be walking away from. I mean, I think it's going to be like one of these things where you get a piece of steak and you throw it into the piranha pool, and you watch each of the governments sort of jumping out and trying to eat whatever's left.
Yeah, I think when the first government realizes that many other governments are going to go, hey, wait a second, we want steak.
Yep, I agree. Mm.
Thanks, Michael.
Okay, Craig, I'm going to throw two words at you now, and these
Mm-hmm.
are democracy and contracts,
Mm-hmm.
because neither nodes nor users have a vote in Bitcoin. And I guess that's where BTC is like going completely wrong, because they somehow confuse contracts with democracy. Contract is a legal structure, while democracy is a political one.
Well, one, democracy isn't what we should be aiming for. I'll say that and people take it the wrong way, but the truth of the matter is a republic is different to a democracy. And even in Britain, there are constitutional rules and multiple houses, etc. In the US, even more so. Democracy is this concept that individuals each vote for things, but that only works in a polis, a small city. Once you get up to the size of beyond a city state, it becomes difficult, if not impossible. So that's where you want to distribute power even more, not the people. And the problem with democracy in a modern society is media. As de Tocqueville sort of said, media can be a great force to make people free, but it can also be a source of demagoguery and control and misleading power. So we need to ensure that we have constraints over all forces, not just the people vote, but the people can't be misled. So you need an independent judiciary. You need a Senate. Basically you need to balance power between different groups so that you minimize access to power. That's what decentralized power is really about. Not give it to the people who can be misled, but make sure that the people can't be misled, because you have controls over media, over how the voting is allocated, that you can't have gerrymandering, that you can't have rotten boroughs, etc. So it's really the distribution of where people can take those focal points of power and limiting what any one person can do and making everyone accountable. So that's point number one. Now, the best way to ensure that is to not have any point of power. So part of the key aspect here was, if you have a set protocol, if it just runs, then what power? You limit as much as possible the power that anyone can have in the system. And people will go, but shouldn't I be able to vote about money? No, you shouldn't. The same way you don't vote about gold. If you want to vote, buy, sell, trade, exchange, you vote with your dollar. If you buy more Bitcoin, and if you buy enough, the price goes up. You sell enough, the price goes down. You trade for other goods, it affects price. But if you vote, should we have more? Well, that just means you're voting without holding anything on how you're going to impact other people who have property. And you shouldn't have the right to vote people's property away. People are individuals. People have an entitlement to what they have created, what they own, what they give to other people even. So being able to sit there and say, I should be able to vote on your Bitcoin, on your wealth, on your whatever else. That's just a redistributive policy where I'm saying, I'm envious of you. I don't think that you who have worked harder or been luckier or whatever should have that. I think I'm going to take it away. So no, it shouldn't be democracy. It should just be like gold.
Right.
You don't vote gold. I'm not going to sit there and go, I vote that we have more gold. I mean, you can, but it doesn't do anything. I mean, I think gold should double. Yay. In my postmodern sort of personal truth thing, I can believe that there's more gold, but there's not.
So, Craig, can the attack from Core maybe be described as a democratic attack on a contract, on property law, on property rights, on essentially on you? So, because
I would not call it democratic. I would call it demagoguery.
Mm-hmm. which is
I
like
might
the
even,
shadow of democracy, maybe.
Yes. It
I,
is
I
what
might,
a democracy degrades into.
I might say it's actually also a bit socialist. But there's always been a bit of a socialist agenda, except not just a socialist agenda. There's been a portrayed socialist agenda from the call off for the last 10 years. They give this illusion of everyone should have a vote, everyone should have a call, but when in reality, there's a small cabal of them who actually calls for shots.
Mm-hmm. Yes,
So,
you can say whatever you want, and we'll tell you whether you did it right.
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I think that was just like the elections in Belarus. You all vote, and I'll tell you how you voted. You all put in what you want into GitHub, and we will tell you what you thought.
And then I don't know why some people seem happy about it, and the ones which argue against it, they're silenced by the controllers of
Oh,
information.
you have the free right of speech as long as you say the right thing. Remember that. You have the freedom to believe the way we tell you to believe.
It's something I've faced throughout the last years, especially with
No, you
running,
didn't.
especially running the membership club, is that people have gone on about censorship. That that I censor people from starting fights, and I'm like, yes, so what?
Yeah, but only governments can actually censor you. See, this is the whole point. This is private property. It's a disingenuous argument going, I want to be able to go into your property and cause problems. And then they'll run around going, private property is sacrosanct, unless it's yours.
Yeah, yeah.
You can say anything you want, as long as it's on the agreed agenda. And you can't stop me from saying things because I can go in there and cause problems. Well, yeah, actually we can. You can go out there and say whatever you want within reason. And this is something also people don't realize. Free speech does not include lies or fraud or things that are provably not true, that actually harm people. And it doesn't include racist statements or hate crimes or anything like this. You can't stand up there and sort of call out racial slurs. You can't attack someone because they're disabled. You can't do any of these things. That's not part of free speech.
Okay. Craig, is Ethereum bound under contract?
Yes, but it's a completely different contract. Basically, what you have is a group who have taken a bunch of Bitcoin anyway in the beginning, which is their right. And they've said, these are our Bitcoin, so they'll actually have to pay tax on that eventually. They don't think they need to, but the reality is whenever you issue and it goes, when you sell it, you're going to have to pay tax. So they haven't, it's not like they've earned it and they can put the costs against it. They've actually got an allocation. So same as if you have a share allocation as being an early employee with a company. There are tax implications of that. And in the US, tax implications actually come not when you sell it, but right at the beginning. So eventually, these things are going to come and bite them. Now, the problem that a shareholder effectively in Ethereum has, which is effectively because Ethereum's really like a share, especially when they go to proof of stake. Now, let's see, we have a group, the Ethereum Foundation, who say we can do things like changing the protocol and whatever else. They've never said that the protocol's set in stone. They said that's a stupid idea. They said I'm an idiot because I set the protocol in stone. Well, effectively that allows them the complete freedom to change whatever they want. Think about that. You now have an asset where they can decide at any point, we want to change this. Why? Because we feel like it.
Would they be able to?
It's hard.
Would they be able to implement a Amory style tax and
Yes.
not get any repercussions?
There will be legal repercussions in that they'll need to pay tax and other such things. Now, the difficulty I can't speak for everywhere. I mean, I've studied a little bit of US law, a lot of British law. So I could not, for instance, tell you anything about the law in Uzbekistan. I'm sure they've got someone there who actually knows, or even maybe they've even got some law there, but at times it seems rather Wild West in that country. But so I can't talk about those ones. But what I can say is there are defined obligations based on behavior. So how you act as a group can be used in court. But that becomes a lot messier. So think about it for a minute. You now have to go into court and make a whole lot of arguments, basically sitting there going, this is what I thought they meant. Yeah.
Hard.
Yeah, it becomes hard. So it becomes messy for all parties involved. It then opens up the Ethereum Foundation to all sorts of legal actions where people go, well, you promised us that you would scale and this doesn't work. We invested because of that. And it's the same when you make statements as a corporation. So for US investors, there's now a path against all of this because you've actually made, and they're large enough that they could be treated as some of the same provisions as a public company for reporting, even though they're not. That could be incredibly problematic.
Especially if they Twitter all day, not knowing that.
Yeah, I mean, think about what happened to a certain Tesla corporate head, and just stupid little Twitter things that got him in trouble. Think how much BS goes out from different people in charge of the Ethereum Foundation.
So the reason I did bring up this topic of Bitcoin as a contract is in BSV, we tend to talk about Bitcoin BSV being stable in two ways. Like we have a fixed program, code-wise stability, and economically stable foundation to build onto. But actually, Bitcoin seems to be stable in three ways because we have a fixed program, we're economically stable, and contractually. And this is maybe the key differentiator from BSV to all the other coins, that the stability lies in the contract.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, so this would be part one for now. And I don't know, Joel, do we have to make a break here or a cut for the record?
We can give it a few minutes break. I will
let's do that. I'll grab a coffee.